not all value is measured in dollars. Even though we're still using the dollar signs, if you're a CEO with the family, time with your kids is probably really high on the value. But I wanted to make sure that people recognize different levels of value. Because sometimes to just talk about dollars, especially in the leadership situation, it's nearly impossible. Like, talk about one-on-one with your direct report or with somebody on your team. For a leader, it's the highest value time, highest value investment that you can make on a week thing, but there is no dollar sign to it. How would you quantify that? Like when you're doing it yourself as a, solopreneur, that's a different story. And if that is then important dimension for you, again, go for it. But I think that in a team setting or in an organizational setting, I think that we need to open up the definition of the value a little bit more.
Welcome back to CardCast, the podcast where Milan and I chat about a card that we pick at random from Milan's deck. I've got a set of the decks here, so if you're interested, I'm sure they will be available to buy soon. And I'm sure there'll be a link in the podcast when we release it.
Great. So let's shuffle the deck today. Time Audit. Okay, so this is one of the little more practical cards. Not much philosophy today, so it will be quite interesting. So, what is Time Audit? Jet, you mentioned that you're doing one just as we speak. So, why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah, Time Audit is from Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. If you haven't read that book, it's a great book and you should absolutely read it. But you shouldn't just read it. You need to apply the lessons in the book to get the value. And I'm actually doing a time audit myself. I started on 1st of January. Well, the 2nd of January, because the 1st of January wasn't particularly productive. And I'm doing it for the whole month of January.
Good for
and
you.
I'm doing
That's
it for,
awesome.
I'm doing it. Yeah, I think 4 weeks, particularly with our pattern of work that tends to sort of bunch up at the end and beginning of quarters. I thought doing it for the full month would make more sense. And I'm actually doing a time audit for 2 reasons. First of all, it's one of the books that I'm recommending that my leadership teams read if they haven't read it already. And secondly, I was starting to get the feeling that I wasn't really in control of how I was intentionally spending time. And the only way you can really understand where to direct your time best is to actually get the data behind where you spend your time. So 2 reasons I'm doing a time audit. First of all, because I'm recommending it to my clients. And secondly, because I wanted the data behind where I'm spending my time. So what is a time audit? So we basically break the day down into 15-second increments from whenever you start to whenever you finish.
15 seconds would be a little too much. 15 minutes, I think, is more practical.
15 minutes, absolutely.
Hey,
yeah. Not even lawyers count in 15 seconds. Yeah. It's a 15-minute intervals, and then you record all of what you do in those 15-minute intervals from a selection of different categories that you come up with, or you can use a standard set of time categories, so that you can get an understanding of where you spend your time. Now, what you do with that data, you plot that against 2 different dimensions. For each of those categories, you're asking a question is, does this activity light me up? And secondly, does it generate dollars for me, as in high generation of dollars to low generation of dollars? So I'm a former architect and engineer, so I love a 2x2 grid. So once you plot all of those categories into those different dimensions, you can get an understanding of top right, it lights you up and generates a lot of dollars for you. Bottom right lights you up, but it doesn't generate dollars for you. And then top left doesn't light you up, but generates dollars. And bottom left doesn't light you up, doesn't generate dollars. And going through those 4 categories, I'm going to read this out from the book just so that it's I don't get it wrong. Top right generates dollars and lights you up is production. Bottom right is investment. Top left, replacement. So find another way of doing it. And bottom left is delegation. Get someone else to do it. Get someone else to take ownership of it. So those are the two dimensions in Dan Martell's book. Now, Milan, I noticed that you use a slightly different category for the value dimension. Take me through your thinking there, because it's good to see a different perspective on that.
Well, the principle is same, and frankly, and even on the card, I'm talking about Dan Martell's book because it's exactly the source of that original thought of how to get there. So let's give credit where credit is due. I noticed a lot of my clients, because I do this very, very often on different levels of leadership, and I would coach the leaders to do it with the members of their team that they have some concerns about time and value and so on and so on. And the question of the value came up repeatedly, right? And it's like, what does that actually mean? And eventually, and I don't think that these were really our words. My words, I think that a client mentioned it eventually, that the way I understand it is that the enjoyment dimension is how do you feel during doing the job, and value is how do you feel about getting it done, which
Okay.
is one way of looking at it. But I also wanted to recognize that not all value is measured in dollars, even though we're still using the dollar signs. I'm sorry, but if you're a CEO with the family, time with your kids is probably really high on the value level, whether you enjoy it or not. That's a different piece, right? But I wanted to make sure that people recognize different levels of value, because sometimes to just talk about dollars, especially in the leadership situation, it's nearly impossible. Like, talk about one-on-one with your direct report or with somebody on your team. I'm sorry, but it's like, for a leader, it's the highest value time, highest value investment that you can make on a week thing, but there is no dollar sign to it. Like, how would you quantify that? Like, when you're doing it yourself as a, solopreneur, that's a different story. And if that is then important dimension for you, again, go for it. But I think that in a team setting or in an organizational setting, in a leadership situation, I think that we need to open up the definition of the value a little bit more. Does it make sense?
I think you're absolutely, and I think a lot of it depends on your individual context, so your situation. So if you're in hustle mode and every minute in every single day counts, then you probably are measuring value in terms of dollars. But if you're getting to a point where, or if you've got to a point where it's more about the overall value that you're creating, both in your work life and your family life and your home life, then the definition is probably less around dollars and more around the value, what it means for you, your family, and your company, and your context, your environment. So absolutely, I think so. It's a good distinction to make.
Yeah. Look, and like any framework, like you cannot use a framework as a dogma, right? It's a guiding principle, and tweak it. I've added the working genius dimension because it sounded useful and it has proven to be, but it's only useful for the person reading it, right? It's like, because what is time audit about? Ultimately, it's about reflection. It's about
Yeah.
picking it up at the end, looking at the table, and okay, a secret, right? So I often give time audit as a task to leaders I work with. And then they ask me, okay, and when we'll finish, what we're gonna do? Like, what are the rules of what we do? We're just talking about it, right? Like, we'll see. We'll see what we learn. And quite often they come up with their own findings. I don't have to say anything. It's so obvious once you started looking and they said, I probably should. I said, yeah, you probably should. Like, whatever is behind that should. It's just such a simple and such a powerful tool. It just needs to be done right. And I want to say that, like, I've seen a couple of times when people would say, yeah, it's fine. I'll just, I'll go through my Outlook calendar and I'll just fill it up accordingly. I was like, no, that's not how it works, right? You literally have to be diligent. Like, kudos to you for doing it for a month, man, because, I don't have that level of tenacity. But what I usually tell clients is to do it for 2 weeks. But we generally do it a couple of times a year, maybe every 6 months or so, to also see what progress they've made, right? Where did we move? How did the correction actions that they chose or decided to do based on the time audit, how did they reflect it in their life a few months later. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
important to do it current and really just to say how am I feeling about what I'm doing right now.
You've added an additional dimension to this. So, and you mentioned it just a moment ago about the working genius. Talk to me about that one. How does that fit into this model? And I know this is your addition.
So Working Genius, very, very briefly, Patrick Lencioni is on the table group, right? There's a book, the six types of Working Genius. Again, highly recommended. What does that do, unlike your typical, strength finder, there's the strength finders and Brickmeyers and all of those types of assessment that are really focused really on skills and sort of a type. This is really focused on what type of work brings you joy. So once we do the assessment, which is like a 12-minute questionnaire, really, that sort of determines what are your areas of genius and what are your areas of frustration. Just by me saying this, you can see how it maps, right? So it's quite interesting. We're using it as a qualification. It's like, yeah, I really enjoy this, and yeah, it's actually in the zone of my genius, or hey, I actually enjoyed this. It provided a large value. But as far as my assessment goes, this should have been a frustration. What's going on? Maybe I'm evolving, maybe something is changing. So yet again, it just provides another dimension and another way of thinking about it. And it's at that moment is essentially free because we've done the assessment, right? And then it just helps train that language. And again, it's the reflection. It's the looking internally and see, oh, I see. That's actually true. I don't like doing this. Now I have that check-in. I have the 2 weeks of data to prove that.
Yeah. So this is a way of categorizing the level of enjoyment, or whether this lights you up or not. Is it something that you love doing, or is it something you hate doing? Yeah, which is different for everyone.
Yeah, and again, and maybe love might not be the right term. It's really, what gives you energy versus what takes it away from you, because the principle here is that the things that you enjoy doing, using that language, are the ones that you would be preferring if you have a choice. The things that you don't, that are in the frustration category, are the ones that you are likely to skip, procrastinate on, do all of those things. And again, and the more you know about your own behavior, the more you can work on it, and the more you can change those problematic habits, because it's really, really hard to improve something you don't measure. And this is a tool to give you the baseline.
And everyone's different. What lights someone up is a drain for someone else. And, so, this is about allocating the right tasks to the right people. I mean, I hate doing expenses. I have an assistant that finds it really cathartic sitting down there with a pile of receipts, working through them one by one. So we're at different ends of the scale there. It just drives me insane. I get so frustrated having to do it. So I don't. I have delegated that to someone else who actually gets enjoyment from it. So, everyone's happy.
Yeah, exactly. Or then you have an AI which will enjoy anything you're going to ask it to do, right?
Indeed. Well, that's maybe there's a card there, or maybe there is a card. Yeah.
Or there will be, and we'll have a guest for that one. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. So this is a really useful tool, and Milan, I think there's a template on the website on the card, isn't there? There's a template people can download.
Yeah, several cards have that. Like if there is a tool or something like that, there is usually a link. So again, if you go to this podcast to the card that's related to that, you will see just a little. It's just a spreadsheet template. Again, nothing too complicated. But the way we are talking about it here, I'm thinking that maybe turning that into an app that would be the time tracker and might actually be quite interesting. So I will think about that, and maybe we'll add it to the tool set.
Well, there's a vibe coding project for you.
Precisely. Yeah, that's another one.
Just before we wrap up this episode, and you may have an anecdote yourself on Time Audit, but I was with a client quite recently. They've got a leadership team, about 8 people, and this was a book that had been set for them to read last quarter. So they finished it by the end of the quarter. And at our quarterly meeting, I said, okay, so who's read Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell? Every single person put their hands up. Yep. And the next question was, who has actually done a time audit, which is right at the beginning of the book, by the way. It's not buried right at the end, it's right at the beginning. Who has actually done a time audit on themselves? And not one person put their hand up. So it's not just about reading the book. You've actually got to go through and extract the value from having read the book. And if you're not prepared to put the time in to do a time audit and the other things in the book, it's probably not even worth reading a book, to be honest, because you're not really going to get the value from it.
Yeah, look, you know what? I'm not entirely sure about it. You'll get some, but the time audit, it has a huge return on investment. But look, your team did better than one of my recent teams where I posed exactly the same question. Who read Buy Back Your Time? Or I didn't have time to do it. That point, like,
Well, there's the irony, eh? There's the irony.
I don't think I can help you.
Time Audit, it's a really useful tool. It will probably surprise you in what insights it gives you. The outcomes of the time audit exercise are often very, very insightful and very surprising. So if you haven't done a time audit yet, it's worthwhile spending just a few minutes every day for 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks. You'll be surprised at what it delivers.